Picture this. You're 8 months pregnant, sitting in a courtroom, fighting for your child's future. Your husband has drained your bank accounts, hidden millions in offshore accounts, and is trying to take custody of your unborn baby. His mistress sits behind him, smirking, whispering just loud enough for you to hear. Look at her waddling for sympathy. Don't worry, he'll have a real family soon. You feel powerless, broken. Everyone believes his lies. Even your own mother is starting to doubt you. The judge seems convinced by his fake financial documents showing he's nearly bankrupt, while secretly he's bought a $2 million penthouse with a nursery already set up for your baby. But what this arrogant mistress didn't know was that the judge had returned early from recess. She heard every cruel word, and she was about to ask one simple question that would bring their entire house of lies crashing down in the most spectacular way imaginable. This is the true story of Sarah Mitchell, and what happened next will restore your faith that sometimes justice does prevail, but the way it happened, you'll never see it coming. The cold fluorescent lights of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse cast harsh shadows across the worn wooden benches. Sarah Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her 7-month pregnant belly making every position painful. The baby inside her seemed to sense her distress, kicking restlessly against her ribs. Across the courtroom, her husband Derek sat beside his attorney, wearing the same charming smile that had once made her fall in love with him 10 years ago. But now that smile felt like a mask, hiding the stranger he had become. And there, in the front row of the gallery, sat Amanda Cross, Derek's business partner and the woman who had destroyed their marriage. Amanda was everything Sarah felt she wasn't anymore: sleek, polished, and untouched by the exhaustion of pregnancy. Her designer dress hugged her slim figure perfectly, and her dark hair was styled in an expensive blowout that probably cost more than Sarah's grocery budget for the month. As Sarah's attorney laid out their case for temporary support, Amanda leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Look at her waddling for sympathy. Don't worry, he'll have a real family soon." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people who had already taken so much from her. But none of them could have predicted that the silent, observing judge would be the one to ask a single devastating question that would bring their entire house of lies crashing down. 6 months earlier, Sarah's life had looked completely different. She and Derek lived in a stunning $2.3 million modern home in the hills of Austin, Texas. The house was their pride and joy, a symbol of everything they had built together over 10 years of marriage. Sarah had established herself as one of Austin's most successful marketing executives, helping tech startups navigate their way from garage operations to IPO dreams. Derek had built a real estate empire that stretched across 3 states, specializing in luxury commercial properties. Together, they were the power couple that other couples envied. Their greatest joy had been the news of Sarah's pregnancy. After 3 years of fertility struggles, including 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, they had finally conceived. The nursery was painted a soft sage green, and Derek had assembled the crib himself, his hands surprisingly gentle as he carefully followed the instructions. At 34, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The baby growing inside her represented everything she and Derek had worked toward: a family to inherit the empire they had built together. The first crack in their perfect facade was almost imperceptible. It started with Derek's phone buzzing constantly during dinner. "New clients," he explained. The Austin market was exploding, and everyone wanted in on the action. "Big opportunities, babe," Derek would say, kissing her forehead as he headed out for another evening meeting. "This could set us up for life. Set the baby up for life." How could she argue with that? Sarah supported his ambition because she understood it. They were both driven people who had clawed their way up from middle-class backgrounds to build something extraordinary. But then the late nights became frequent nights away. Derek started taking business trips that seemed to multiply week by week. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. Always chasing the next big deal. "The commercial market is changing," he would explain, packing his expensive suits into his leather garment bag. "If we don't move fast, we'll lose everything we've built." Sarah noticed other changes too. Derek had always been meticulous about his appearance, but now he seemed to be trying even harder. New cologne, expensive haircuts more frequently, a personal trainer he suddenly needed to see 4 times a week. When she mentioned it, he laughed it off. "I want to look good for you," he said, placing his hand on her growing belly. "And I want to be in shape to chase after this little one." It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Sarah wanted to believe it, so she did. The pregnancy made her more tired than she had expected. Building a tiny human was exhausting work, and her doctor had recommended reducing her work hours in the second trimester. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah found herself home more often than not. That's when she began to notice the financial irregularities. It started with their credit card statements, charges at restaurants she had never been to, at times when Derek claimed to be in meetings with clients. When she asked about them, he always had explanations. "Lunch with the Henderson Group," he would say, barely looking up from his laptop. "They're considering a major investment in our expansion plans." "Dinner with the Morgan family trust lawyers. They want to diversify their portfolio into commercial real estate." Every explanation was wrapped in the language of their shared future, making it impossible to question without seeming paranoid or unsupportive. But Sarah was an analytical person by nature. Her success in marketing came from her ability to spot patterns and inconsistencies in consumer behavior. And increasingly, Derek's behavior was full of inconsistencies. The breaking point came on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in July. Sarah was searching for their insurance documents in Derek's home office when she opened the wrong drawer in his mahogany desk. There, tucked beneath a stack of old bank statements, was a receipt that made her blood run cold. It was from Moonrise, an exclusive boutique hotel in downtown Austin, known for its romantic atmosphere and sky-high prices. The date was from 2 weeks prior, a Wednesday when Derek had supposedly been in Dallas meeting with investors. The charge was for one night in their penthouse suite, plus room service for two. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the small slip of paper. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he had put up a client there. Maybe it was some kind of business expense that would make sense once he explained it. But beneath the hotel receipt was something that shattered her world completely. It was a small card, cream-colored and expensive. The front was embossed with an elegant letter A in gold foil. Sarah's fingers felt clumsy as she opened it. The handwriting inside was feminine and flowing. "Derek, last night was everything I've dreamed of since we started working together. Watching you build your empire has been intoxicating, but being part of it with you is beyond anything I imagined. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. All my love, Amanda." The words swam before Sarah's eyes. Amanda Cross, Derek's new business partner. The brilliant young woman he had hired 6 months ago to help expand their operations into new markets. Sarah sank into Derek's leather chair, the scent of his cologne rising from the fabric. It was a scent she had once associated with comfort and security. Now it smelled like betrayal. The baby inside her gave a sudden, sharp kick, as if sensing her mother's distress. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the solid reality of new life even as her world crumbled around her. That evening, when Derek came home humming cheerfully and loosening his tie, Sarah was waiting for him in the kitchen. The hotel receipt and the card were laid out on the granite island like evidence at a crime scene. Derek walked in talking about his day, but stopped mid-sentence when he saw the items on the counter. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, the charming mask slipped completely. "Sarah," he began, his voice weak. "What is this?" "I think you know exactly what it is," Sarah replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Who is Amanda to you?" "Derek." The lies came first. It was a prank from someone at the office. The card was old, from before their marriage. He had helped a colleague book a room for a client meeting. Each lie was more transparent than the last, and with each one, a little more of the man Sarah thought she knew crumbled away. "Stop," Sarah finally said, her voice rising. "Just stop lying to me. For 10 years, I thought we had honesty. If we have nothing else left, please just give me that." Derek finally broke. He sank onto a stool across from her, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. The affair had started 4 months ago, he admitted. Amanda was brilliant, ambitious, and understood the pressures he was under in ways that Sarah couldn't. "It meant nothing," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "You and the baby, you're my life. Amanda was just a distraction, a way to blow off steam. I'll end it tonight. I swear to you." But Sarah had always been good at reading people, and Derek's story had holes in it. The card didn't read like a meaningless distraction. It read like a declaration of love. "Show me your phone," she demanded. Panic flashed in Derek's eyes. "Sarah, don't do this to yourself. It'll only hurt you more." "It can't possibly hurt more than this," she whispered. "Show me your phone, Derek." With trembling hands, he unlocked his device and handed it over. Sarah's fingers went straight to his messages. He had deleted the main thread with Amanda, but he hadn't been thorough enough. She found a conversation with his best friend Marcus that made her stomach turn. "Marcus, are you insane? Sarah is pregnant. You have to end it with Amanda." "Derek, I know, but I'm in too deep. It's not just physical anymore. Amanda gets me. She doesn't have all these needs, all this pressure." "Marcus, the pressure of having a family you chose, grow up." "Derek, you don't understand. With Sarah, it's all mortgage payments and baby monitors. With Amanda, I feel alive again." The words, "she doesn't have all these needs," were the final blow. Her needs. The need for honesty, the need for fidelity, the need for a partner who would help her raise their child. Her pregnancy. The thing she thought was their shared miracle had been reframed as a burden he needed to escape from. Sarah pushed the phone back across the island, her hands feeling contaminated by it. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Derek had been living a double life, funded by their joint finances, while she was at home carefully preparing for their family's future. "Get out," she said, the words low and dangerous. "What, Sarah? No. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. We have to. For the baby." "Don't you dare use our child as a shield for your betrayal," she seethed, standing up despite the weight of her belly. "You want to talk about my needs? My need right now is for you to get out of my house." The fight that followed was ugly and raw. Derek accused her of being emotionally distant during the pregnancy, of being more focused on the baby than on him. He twisted her love and support into neglect, her pregnancy fatigue into disinterest. It was a masterclass in narcissistic deflection, designed to make her doubt her own reality. But Sarah's mind was clearer than it had been in months. The fog of confusion that had clouded her judgment was lifting, revealing the truth in sharp, painful focus. "If you're not out of this house in 10 minutes, she finally said, walking to the front door and opening it wide, "I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Derek stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The finality in her voice seemed to penetrate his self-absorbed bubble. He gathered some clothes and walked out into the humid Texas night. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. Sarah leaned against the cool wood, placed both hands on her belly, and for the first time, allowed herself to cry. She wasn't just mourning the end of her marriage. She was mourning the death of the future she had believed in, the family she had thought they were building together. But even through her tears, Sarah felt something else stirring inside her. It wasn't just grief, it was anger. And for the first time in months, that anger felt like power. The weeks following Derek's departure were a blur of legal consultations and financial discoveries that grew more horrifying by the day. Sarah hired Mike Torres, a former prosecutor turned divorce attorney who came highly recommended for his ability to handle complex financial cases. Torres was a steady, no-nonsense man in his early 40s who had seen every dirty trick in the book during his years prosecuting white-collar crime. His office was a sanctuary of leather-bound law books and quiet competence. "Sarah," he said during their first meeting, his voice calm and reassuring, "Texas is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. But Derek's financial behavior suggests we're dealing with someone who's been planning this for a while." The first shock came when Torres tried to access their joint accounts. Derek had frozen everything the day after he left, claiming Sarah was emotionally unstable and might make reckless financial decisions. "He's trying to starve you into submission," Torres explained, his jaw tight with anger. "It's a common tactic. Make you desperate so you'll accept a terrible settlement just to survive." But Derek had underestimated Sarah's resourcefulness. She had her own accounts and immediately began documenting every expense, every asset, every financial move Derek had made in the past year. What she discovered made her physically ill. Derek hadn't just been having an affair. He had been systematically moving their assets into shell companies and offshore accounts. The forensic accountant Torres hired, a meticulous woman named Jennifer Walsh, traced a complex web of financial deception. Your husband is brilliant, Walsh said, pointing to a spreadsheet that looked like a map of financial fraud. He's been planning this for at least 8 months. Look at this pattern. Walsh showed Sarah how Derek had gradually increased the frequency of cash withdrawals from their business accounts, claiming they were for client entertainment and business development. But the amounts were staggering, nearly $40,000 in 6 months. Nobody entertains clients to the tune of $7,000 a month, Walsh said. This money went somewhere else. They found evidence of a luxury apartment lease in Amanda's name, paid for with funds from Derek's business account. There were charges for expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and romantic getaways to Napa Valley and the Hamptons. He's been funding an entire second life, Torres said, his voice grim. And he's been using your marital assets to do it? The betrayal was deeper than adultery. Derek had stolen from their shared future to finance his affair, all while Sarah was at home preparing for their child. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Derek's attorney filed a motion demanding a prenatal paternity test, publicly questioning whether the baby Sarah was carrying was even his. It's psychological warfare, Torres explained, though Sarah could see the anger in his eyes. They want to plant doubt in everyone's mind about your character. They want you to look desperate and untrustworthy. The accusation was so far from the truth that it made Sarah physically sick. She had been faithful to Derek for their entire marriage, even during the lonely months when he was supposedly building their empire. We agree to the test, Torres said firmly. It will prove he's the father, and his malicious suggestion will backfire spectacularly. The paternity test was scheduled for the following week, but Sarah felt violated by the very suggestion. She was being forced to prove the legitimacy of the child she was carrying, a child conceived in what she had believed was a loving marriage. Meanwhile, Amanda Cross was not content to remain in the shadows. She began what Torres called a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break Sarah's resolve. It started online. Amanda's social media profiles, previously private, suddenly became public showcases of her life with Derek. There were photos of them at expensive restaurants, art gallery openings, and weekend trips to places Sarah had always wanted to visit. The captions were carefully crafted daggers. Finally found someone who understands what I need, accompanied by a photo of Amanda's hand wearing an expensive bracelet Sarah recognized from their joint credit card statements. Building something amazing with the most incredible man, with a picture of Derek and Amanda at a construction site for one of his new developments. Each post was a deliberate provocation, designed to show Sarah that she had been replaced by someone younger, more glamorous, and supposedly more deserving of Derek's affection. But Amanda's cruelest move was still to come. A package arrived at Sarah's door via overnight courier. It was elegantly wrapped in silver paper with no return address. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a baby rattle made of sterling silver from Tiffany & Company. Tucked beneath it was a small card embossed with Amanda's initials. Couldn't resist getting something for the little one. Hope he has his father's eyes. Looking forward to being part of his life. XOXO. The audacity was breathtaking. Amanda wasn't just claiming Derek. She was asserting her future role in Sarah's child's life before the baby was even born. Sarah called Torres immediately, her voice shaking with fury. This has to be illegal, she said. This is harassment. It's a gray area, Torres replied, his tone grim. She's not making direct threats. She's being psychologically abusive. But that's difficult to prove in court. She's trying to provoke you into doing something rash. Don't take the bait. Sarah took a deep breath, staring at the expensive rattle in her hands. Amanda wanted to see her broken, wanted her to crawl away with nothing. But Sarah was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about passion or misplaced love. This was a calculated power play. Amanda wasn't some lovesick girl who had fallen for a married man. She was a predator who had identified a target and was systematically destroying it. That evening, Sarah placed the rattle and card in an evidence bag and handed them to Torres's paralegal. She was done being the victim. She was done being afraid. Amanda Cross wanted a war, but she had made a crucial miscalculation. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just a pregnant wife. She was a successful executive who had built her career on reading people and understanding their motivations, and she was beginning to see exactly who Amanda Cross really was. The prenatal paternity test confirmed what Sarah already knew: Derek was the father. But instead of apologizing for the false accusation, Derek's legal team doubled down, claiming the test proved nothing about Sarah's character. "They're desperate," Torres explained. "Derek's financial situation is worse than we thought. He's leveraged to the hilt, and if he has to pay you what you're actually entitled to, his house of cards collapses." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late August, when Sarah would be nearly 8 months pregnant. As the date approached, she felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had spent the past month preparing for battle, gathering evidence, documenting every lie Derek had told and every asset he had tried to hide. Torres had built a case that was methodical and devastating. But Sarah knew that courtrooms weren't just about facts and evidence. They were also about perception, about who seemed more credible and sympathetic. As she looked at herself in the mirror the night before the hearing, she saw a woman transformed by betrayal and pregnancy. She was no longer the polished executive who had once commanded boardrooms. She was rounder, softer, more vulnerable, but she was also stronger than she had ever been. The fire that had been lit by Derek's betrayal had burned away her illusions and left something harder and more determined in its place. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom and face the two people who had destroyed her marriage. Derek would likely lie under oath, painting himself as the victim. Amanda would sit in the gallery like a queen surveying her conquest. But Sarah had something they didn't: the truth. And she was about to discover that sometimes, in the right hands, the truth could be a devastating weapon. As she placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements, Sarah made a promise. She would fight for this child's future. She would fight for justice. And she would show Derek and Amanda that they had made a fatal error in underestimating the woman they had tried to destroy. The battle was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was ready for war. The Harris County Courthouse loomed before Sarah like a monument to broken dreams. As she walked through the metal detectors, her belly preceding her like a declaration of vulnerability, she felt the weight of every stare from the people in the crowded hallways. Mike Torres walked beside her, carrying 2 briefcases full of the evidence they had meticulously gathered. His presence was reassuring, but Sarah knew that ultimately, she would have to face this alone. The courtroom was smaller than she had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh, unflattering shadows. Derek was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, Robert Peterson, a man whose reputation for aggressive tactics preceded him like a warning. Derek looked haggard but well-dressed, wearing an expensive suit that projected success while his face attempted to convey suffering. He refused to meet Sarah's eyes, instead focusing on papers that Sarah suspected were props more than actual documents. But it was the figure in the gallery that made Sarah's breath catch. Amanda Cross sat in the front row, directly behind Derek's table. She wasn't dressed provocatively or inappropriately. Instead, she wore a sophisticated charcoal gray dress that suggested professional competence and emotional support. Amanda offered Sarah a small, pitying smile as she took her seat. It was an expression that seemed to say, "Look at you, all alone and pregnant, while I'm here supporting the man we both love." Judge Patricia Reynolds entered with the bearing of someone who had seen every variety of human deception during her 20 years on the bench. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s who radiated no-nonsense authority. "This is a preliminary hearing to establish temporary support orders," Judge Reynolds began, her voice cutting through the hushed courtroom. "I'm here to determine immediate financial needs, not to adjudicate the ultimate dissolution of this marriage." Peterson stood first, launching into a performance worthy of a theater stage. He painted Derek as a heartbroken man whose world had collapsed around him due to circumstances beyond his control. "Your Honor," Peterson said, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy, "Mr. Mitchell is devastated by the breakdown of his marriage. However, recent market volatility has severely impacted his real estate holdings, reducing his income to a fraction of what it once was." Peterson presented financial documents that portrayed Derek as barely scraping by, claiming his previously substantial income had evaporated due to economic downturns and failed investments. "Mr. Mitchell is prepared to offer modest support for the child," Peterson continued, "but any significant spousal support is simply impossible given his current financial straits." Sarah watched this performance with growing amazement. Derek's supposed poverty was contradicted by everything she knew about his recent activities. The man claiming near bankruptcy had spent thousands of dollars on Amanda in just the past month. When Torres stood for his turn, he methodically began dismantling Peterson's fiction. He presented Derek's income statements from the previous 3 years, showing a consistent pattern of substantial earnings. "Your Honor," Torres said, his voice steady and factual, "while Mr. Mitchell claims financial hardship, the evidence tells a different story. In the past 6 months alone, his corporate credit cards show over $40,000 in charges for personal expenses." Torres presented receipts for expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, and designer purchases. He showed the court documentation of the apartment lease in Amanda's name, paid for with business funds. "These are not the expenditures of a man facing financial ruin," Torres argued. "These are the expenditures of a man who believes he can hide assets from his pregnant wife." Peterson objected repeatedly, claiming these were legitimate business expenses necessary for client development. Judge Reynolds sustained most objections, but seemed increasingly skeptical of the defense's claims. During a brief recess, Sarah stood in the hallway trying to process what she had witnessed. The legal maneuvering felt surreal, reducing her life to financial calculations and strategic presentations. It was then that Amanda approached her near the water fountain. The encounter was carefully orchestrated to appear accidental. "Oh, Sarah," Amanda said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I'm so sorry about all this. It must be incredibly stressful in your condition." Amanda looked down at Sarah's swollen belly with an expression that seemed sympathetic but felt calculating. "Derek is so worried about you," Amanda continued. "He just wants this to be over so everyone can move forward. Maybe you should consider accepting whatever he's offering. All this stress can't be good for the baby." The threat was implicit but clear: drop the fight or risk harming your unborn child. Sarah looked directly into Amanda's eyes, seeing the cold calculation beneath the manufactured concern. "The only thing that's stressful, Amanda, is watching grown adults lie under oath while their accomplices watch from the gallery like it's entertainment." Amanda's sweet smile tightened, the mask of concern slipping to reveal the ruthless ambition beneath. "You're making a mistake if you think this ends well for you," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're yesterday's news. Sarah, the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." Before Sarah could respond, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. Judge Reynolds was ready to make her temporary ruling. "Based on the financial declarations submitted," Judge Reynolds began, "and pending a more thorough review at trial, I am ordering Mr. Mitchell to pay temporary spousal support in the amount of $2,000 per month and to cover all prenatal medical expenses." A sharp intake of breath came from Amanda in the gallery. It was a small sound, but in the quiet courtroom, it carried like a siren of dismay. Peterson immediately began protesting, but Judge Reynolds cut him off with a sharp rap of her gavel. "This is a temporary order. Mr. Peterson, I suggest your client find a way to comply. We are adjourned." As they filed out of the courtroom, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. $2,000 was far less than she was entitled to, barely enough to cover the mortgage on their home. It was a temporary reprieve, not a victory. Derek stormed past her without acknowledgement, his face pale with fury. Amanda followed, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. As they passed, Amanda shot Sarah one final look, a promise that this was far from over. But the real blow came the next day. Sarah was at home, trying to process the hearing's events, when Torres called with devastating news. "Sarah, you need to sit down," Torres said, his voice grave. "Derek's team has made their next move, and it's worse than we expected." That morning, Derek had filed for full custody of the unborn child, claiming Sarah was mentally unstable and posed a danger to the baby's welfare. The petition included affidavits from unnamed witnesses claiming Sarah had been drinking during pregnancy and exhibiting erratic behavior. "It's all fabricated," Torres said quickly, hearing Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "But they've also filed a motion to freeze all marital assets pending a forensic accounting review. They're claiming you've been embezzling from the joint business accounts." Sarah felt the world tilting around her. "That's impossible. I haven't touched those accounts in months." "I know," Torres said, "but they've presented what appears to be documentary evidence of transfers to accounts in your name. We'll need to prove it's fraudulent. But in the meantime, You're financially cut off. The full scope of Derek's strategy was becoming clear. He wasn't just trying to avoid paying support. He was attempting to destroy her completely. By claiming she was mentally unstable and financially dishonest, he was laying groundwork to take custody of their child while painting himself as the responsible parent. There's more, Torres continued, his voice heavy with reluctance. They've also filed a motion to have you undergo psychiatric evaluation, claiming your pregnancy hormones have made you delusional and vindictive. Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, feeling the baby moving restlessly inside her. Every legal document was a new attack, a fresh attempt to strip away her credibility and her rights. The systematic nature of the assault was breathtaking. Derek and Amanda hadn't just planned an affair. They had orchestrated a complete character assassination designed to leave Sarah with nothing. "They're trying to make me disappear," Sarah said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Yes," Torres agreed, "but they've overplayed their hand. The custody motion is particularly weak because the baby isn't born yet, and the embezzlement claims are so obviously fabricated that they'll backfire once we get discovery." But Sarah understood the psychological warfare at play. Even if these accusations were eventually disproven, the process would be humiliating and expensive. Derek was betting that she would break under the pressure and accept whatever terms he offered just to escape the ordeal. That evening, Sarah sat in the nursery she had so carefully prepared, running her hands over the crib Derek had assembled. The room that had once represented hope and new beginnings now felt like a monument to shattered dreams. The baby kicked vigorously, as if responding to her emotional turmoil. Sarah placed both hands on her belly, feeling the solid reality of the life growing inside her. "I won't let them win," she whispered to her unborn child. "I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. I won't let them steal your future." She had thought Derek's betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to her, but she was beginning to understand that betrayal was just the opening move in a much larger game. Derek and Amanda weren't just trying to end her marriage, they were trying to erase her entirely. They wanted to rewrite history so that Sarah became the villain in her own story, the unstable woman who had driven her husband away through her own inadequacies. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that pregnancy had made her weak and vulnerable. They saw her growing belly as evidence of her dependence and desperation. What they failed to understand was that pregnancy had given her something more powerful than they could imagine, an absolute commitment to protecting her child that would make her more formidable than they had ever anticipated. The first battle was over, and Sarah had been bloodied, but the war was just beginning, and she was learning that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. 3 weeks after the devastating legal filings, Derek appeared at Sarah's door on a rainy Thursday evening. She was 8 months pregnant now, moving carefully and sleeping poorly. The constant stress had taken its toll, and her doctor had expressed concern about her blood pressure. Derek stood on the doorstep looking genuinely remorseful, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. For a moment, he looked like the man she had fallen in love with years ago, vulnerable and uncertain. "Sarah, please," he said. "We need to talk. This has gotten completely out of hand." Against her better judgment in Torres's explicit advice, Sarah let him in. They sat in the living room where they had once planned their future together, the space now feeling cavernous and cold. "I made a terrible mistake," Derek began, his voice thick with what seemed like genuine emotion. "Amanda convinced me that you would try to take everything, that I needed to protect myself. But these custody claims, the accusations about your mental state, I never wanted it to go this far." Derek pulled out his phone and showed Sarah what appeared to be a termination notice for Amanda's employment with his company. "I ended our business partnership," he said. "I ended everything with her. You were right. She was manipulating me, playing on my fears about fatherhood and financial pressure." The document looked official, complete with letterhead and legal language about breach of contract. Derek's signature was at the bottom, dated just 2 days earlier. "She threatened to ruin me if I left her," Derek continued. "She said she had evidence that could destroy my business reputation. But I realized that losing you and our baby would be worse than losing everything else." Sarah wanted desperately to believe him. The past months had been a nightmare of legal battles and financial uncertainty. The idea that it could all end, that they could somehow rebuild their family, was almost irresistibly appealing. I'll drop all the legal motions, Derek promised. I'll pay whatever support you think is fair. I just want our family back. Derek reached for her hand, and for a moment, Sarah let him hold it. She could feel the baby responding to her elevated heart rate, moving restlessly inside her. I need to think about this, Sarah said finally, and I need to talk to my lawyer. Of course, Derek agreed quickly. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I want you to know that I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. Derek stood to leave, then turned back with an expression of genuine seeming concern. How are you feeling? You look tired. For just a moment, Sarah felt a flash of the old intimacy, the man who had once taken care of her when she was sick and celebrated every small milestone of her pregnancy. I'm okay, she said. The stress hasn't been great, but the baby seems healthy. That's all that matters, Derek said. Our baby's health and your well-being, that's my priority now. After he left, Sarah sat in the darkened living room, feeling more confused than she had in weeks. Could people really change that dramatically? Could the Derek who had orchestrated such a cruel legal assault suddenly rediscover his conscience? The next morning, Sarah called Torres to discuss Derek's apparent change of heart. I don't like it, Torres said immediately. The timing is suspicious. We've been building a strong case against him, and his financial situation is worse than he's admitted. This feels like desperation, not genuine remorse. But he showed me termination papers for Amanda, Sarah protested. He ended their business relationship. Papers can be faked, Torres replied. Even if they're real, it doesn't mean he's ended their personal relationship. Sarah, I've seen this before. When cornered, men like Derek often try the reconciliation approach. They hope they can manipulate their wives into dropping the legal proceedings. But Sarah was exhausted from fighting. The constant battle was wearing her down physically and emotionally. The idea of reconciliation, even if it meant accepting less than she deserved, was tempting. Maybe we should see what he offers, Sarah suggested. If he's really changed, maybe we can work something out. Torres was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, it's your decision, but promise me you won't sign anything without letting me review it first. And please be very careful about what you believe. That afternoon, Derek sent a formal settlement proposal through his attorney. On the surface, it seemed generous. He would keep the family home, pay substantial child support, and provide health insurance for the baby. In exchange, Sarah would waive any claim to his business assets and agree to joint custody. The proposal seemed like an olive branch, an acknowledgement that Sarah deserved compensation for what she had endured. She found herself seriously considering it, despite Torres's warnings. But then her world collapsed again, more completely than before. It started with a phone call from her best friend, Maria, who worked in commercial real estate development. Sarah, I need to tell you something, Maria said, her voice tense with reluctance. I saw Derek and Amanda yesterday at the Driscoll Hotel. They were at the bar, and they were definitely not acting like former business partners. Sarah felt her stomach clench. What do you mean? They were all over each other, Maria said gently, holding hands, kissing. And Sarah, Amanda was wearing what looked like an engagement ring. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. While Derek was at her house professing his remorse and desire for reconciliation, he was still intimately involved with Amanda. There's more, Maria continued reluctantly. I overheard part of their conversation. Amanda was talking about some penthouse they were decorating together. She mentioned wanting to have the nursery ready before the baby comes to visit. Sarah's hands began to shake. The nursery. Sarah, I think they're planning to take your baby. They're setting up a home together and expecting to get custody. After hanging up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. Derek's reconciliation attempt wasn't genuine remorse. It was a strategic maneuver designed to make her let down her guard. She called Torres immediately. We need to investigate this penthouse, Torres said grimly. If Derek is hiding assets in the form of expensive real estate purchases, it changes everything about his claimed financial hardship. What Torres discovered over the next 2 days was even worse than Sarah had imagined. Derek and Amanda had indeed purchased a $1.8 million penthouse in downtown Austin just 3 weeks earlier. The purchase was made through a shell company called Meridian Holdings, LLC, with Derek listed as CEO and Amanda as CFO. This was purchased while he was claiming poverty in court, Torres explained. It's not just asset hiding, it's perjury. He lied under oath about his financial situation. But the most devastating discovery came when Torres obtained the building permits for renovations on the penthouse. Among the planned modifications was a fully equipped nursery, complete with high-end baby furniture and professional decoration. Derek and Amanda hadn't just been planning their future together. They had been planning to raise Sarah's child in their love nest, assuming they would gain custody through the legal machinations they had set in motion. The realization hit Sarah with sickening clarity. Derek's settlement offer wasn't designed to compensate her. It was designed to establish a custody arrangement that would give him access to the baby while keeping the bulk of his assets hidden. "They never intended for me to keep my child," Sarah said, the words feeling surreal as she spoke them. "It looks that way," Torres agreed. The nursery, the custody motion, even the psychiatric evaluation request. It's all part of a plan to paint you as unfit while positioning Derek and Amanda as the stable, loving couple who can provide for the baby. Sarah felt a rage unlike anything she had ever experienced. The betrayal of her marriage was one thing, but the calculated plan to steal her child was something else entirely. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fury coursing through her veins. "We expose everything," Torres said. "Derek made a fatal mistake by lying about his assets in court. Judge Reynolds doesn't like being deceived, and when she sees the evidence of this penthouse purchase, Derek's credibility will be destroyed." But first, and they had to prevent Derek from realizing they had discovered his deception. Torres advised Sarah to continue appearing to consider the settlement offer while they gathered more evidence. "Let him think his plan is working," Torres said. "The more confident he gets, the more mistakes he'll make." That evening, Sarah sat in the nursery she had so lovingly prepared, looking at the crib Derek had assembled and the clothes she had carefully folded. Everything in the room was a testament to her love for the child she was carrying. The idea that Derek and Amanda had been planning to take this baby, to raise her child as their own, while treating Sarah like a surrogate who had outlived her usefulness, filled her with a determination she had never felt before. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's strong movements. Her child would not grow up in that penthouse nursery, would not be raised by the woman who had destroyed their family. Derek had made the mistake of thinking pregnancy had made Sarah weak and desperate, but he was about to learn that threatening a mother's child was the surest way to unleash a force more powerful than he could imagine. The false dawn of reconciliation had passed, revealing the brutal reality beneath. But now Sarah knew exactly what she was fighting for, and exactly what her enemies were planning. The real battle was about to begin, and this time, Sarah would be ready for war. The call came at 6:30 in the morning on a Tuesday that would become burned into Sarah's memory forever. She was in the kitchen, struggling to make breakfast while dealing with the increasingly uncomfortable weight of her 8-month pregnancy, when her phone rang. "Sarah, you need to get to my office immediately," Torres said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't identify. "Derek's team filed motions overnight. Multiple motions." "What kind of motions?" Sarah asked, though something in Torres's tone told her she didn't want to know the answer. "The kind that changes everything. I can't discuss this over the phone." "How quickly can you get here?" An hour later, Sarah sat across from Torres in his office, watching his face as he explained the magnitude of what Derek had done. 3 separate legal documents lay spread across his desk like the aftermath of an explosion. "Derek filed for divorce first," Torres began, his voice carefully controlled. "Not only that, but he's claiming you committed adultery. He's alleging that the baby you're carrying might not be his." Sarah felt the world tilt. "But the paternity test proved he's the father," Torres interrupted. "But that doesn't matter for the adultery claim. He's saying the test only proves one possible father, not that there weren't others." Torres handed her the first document. Sarah's hands shook as she read Derek's sworn statement, claiming she had been emotionally distant and potentially unfaithful during their marriage, and that he had reason to believe she had been involved with other men. "This is insane," Sarah whispered. "I was never unfaithful. I barely left the house during the pregnancy." "I know," Torres said grimly, "but that's not the worst part." He handed her the second document, this one thicker and more complex. It was a forensic accounting report commissioned by Derek's team, alleging that Sarah had embezzled over $200,000 from their joint business accounts over the past year. "They're claiming you set up shell companies and transferred money to personal accounts," Torres explained. The report includes what appear to be bank statements and transaction records showing systematic theft. Sarah stared at the papers in disbelief. The documents looked official, complete with letterhead from a respected accounting firm in detailed financial analysis. But every allegation was false. I've never created any shell companies, Sarah said. I haven't touched those business accounts except for approved expenses. The documents are sophisticated forgeries, Torres said. But proving that will take time and money. In the meantime, these allegations give Derek grounds to freeze all assets and portray you as financially irresponsible. But Torres wasn't finished. He handed her the third document, and Sarah felt her heart stop as she read the heading, Emergency Motion for Temporary Custody and Protection Order. Derek is asking for immediate custody of the baby upon birth, Torres explained. He's claiming that your alleged mental instability, combined with the financial crimes, make you an unfit mother who poses a danger to the child. The motion included affidavits from witnesses Sarah had never heard of, claiming they had observed her drinking alcohol while pregnant, exhibiting erratic behavior, and making threats against Derek and Amanda. None of this is true, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Torres replied, but Derek's team has been very clever. They've created a narrative where everything reinforces everything else. The alleged adultery explains your supposed emotional instability. The financial crimes suggest you're desperate and untrustworthy, and both together paint you as someone who shouldn't have custody of a child. Sarah felt nauseous as the full scope of Derek's strategy became clear. This wasn't just about avoiding alimony or child support. This was a coordinated attempt to destroy her so completely that she would lose not just her marriage and her financial security, but her child as well. When does the judge hear these motions? Sarah asked. Thursday, Torres said. 2 days from now. Derek's team is claiming emergency circumstances that require immediate judicial intervention. Sarah spent the rest of Tuesday in a daze, trying to comprehend how her life had become a legal nightmare that seemed more like a thriller novel than reality. Torres worked frantically to prepare a response, but they were playing defense against accusations that were elaborate and well-coordinated. Wednesday morning brought a new horror. Sarah woke to find photographers outside her house, taking pictures as she tried to bring in her newspaper. Within hours, a gossip blog had posted an article titled, Pregnant Wife of Real Estate Mogul Accused of Adultery and Embezzlement. The article included unflattering photos of Sarah looking disheveled and pregnant, juxtaposed with glamorous shots of Derek and Amanda at various social events. The narrative portrayed Derek as a successful businessman, driven to desperation by his wife's betrayal and criminal behavior. Amanda orchestrated this, Torres said when Sarah called him in tears. She's using her PR connections to shape public opinion before the hearing. By Wednesday afternoon, the story had been picked up by local news stations. Sarah watched in horror as a reporter stood outside her house, describing her as the estranged wife facing serious allegations of adultery and financial crimes. The stress triggered contractions that sent Sarah to the hospital for monitoring. As she lay in the obstetrics unit, surrounded by machines measuring her baby's heartbeat, she felt completely powerless. You need to try to stay calm, her doctor said, though Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. Stress this severe can trigger early labor, and we want the baby to stay put for at least another few weeks. That evening, as Sarah tried to rest at home, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and for a moment, Sarah felt a surge of relief. She desperately needed family support. Sarah, honey. Her mother's voice was strained and confused. I've been seeing things on the news. What's going on? Sarah tried to explain the situation, but as she spoke, she could hear the doubt creeping into her mother's voice. But sweetheart, her mother said gently, Derek called me yesterday. He seemed so concerned about you. He said you've been acting strangely, that you're not taking care of yourself properly. Sarah felt her world crumble a little more. Mom, Derek is lying. He's having an affair, and he's trying to take the baby away from me. I know you're upset about the marriage problems, her mother said, but are you sure you're thinking clearly? Pregnancy can be very stressful, and sometimes it affects judgment. Maybe you should consider the possibility that Derek is genuinely worried about you. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Sarah's mother expressing increasingly obvious doubt about her daughter's version of events. Derek had been convincing, playing the role of the concerned husband worried about his unstable wife. When Sarah finally hung up, she realized she was truly alone. Derek's campaign of destruction had been so thorough that even her own mother was questioning her sanity. She sat in the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of her love and preparation for this baby. The mobile turned slowly overhead, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Everything in the room represented her dreams for their family's future. Tomorrow, she would walk into a courtroom where Derek would ask a judge to take her baby away before it was even born. He had painted her as an adulteress, a criminal, and a mentally unstable woman unfit for motherhood. The man who had once vowed to love and protect her had become her most dangerous enemy, using his knowledge of her vulnerabilities and fears to craft the perfect weapon against her. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. Her child was still safe inside her, still protected by her body. But in just a few weeks, that protection would end, and Derek would try to take everything that mattered to her. "I won't let him win," she whispered to her unborn baby. "I don't care what lies he tells or how much money he spends. I will fight for you until my last breath." But as she sat alone in the dark nursery, Sarah couldn't shake the terrifying knowledge that Derek had planned this assault with meticulous precision. Every move had been calculated to destroy her credibility and isolate her from support. Tomorrow's hearing would determine whether Derek's elaborate fiction would succeed, whether the lies he had constructed would be believed by the one person whose opinion mattered most, Judge Patricia Reynolds. The triple catastrophe of accusations had left Sarah reeling, but it had also clarified something important. This wasn't just a divorce proceeding or a custody dispute. This was a battle for the truth itself, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Her child's future hung in the balance, and Sarah was running out of time to prove that everything Derek claimed was an elaborate, malicious lie designed to steal not just her money, but her baby as well. The Thursday morning hearing was a blur of legal arguments and devastating testimony. Derek took the stand wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of pained sincerity that would have been convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Under Peterson's gentle questioning, Derek painted himself as a devoted husband who had been driven to desperation by his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. "I started noticing changes during the second trimester," Derek testified, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern rather than anger. "Sarah became secretive about her activities, defensive when I asked simple questions about her day." Derek claimed he had discovered the alleged financial irregularities when he tried to access their business accounts and found unexplained transfers. He presented himself as a man who had been forced to investigate his own wife's potential crimes. "The hardest part," Derek said, looking directly at Judge Reynolds, "was realizing that the woman I loved might be putting our unborn child at risk through her behavior." Peterson guided Derek through a presentation of the forged financial documents, each one meticulously crafted to look authentic. Sarah watched Judge Reynolds studying the papers, her expression unreadable. When Torres cross-examined Derek, he attempted to poke holes in the fabricated timeline, but Derek was well prepared. His answers were consistent and delivered with just the right amount of reluctant sadness. "Mr. Mitchell," Torres said, "isn't it true that you've been having an affair with Amanda Cross for the past 6 months?" "I've admitted to emotional connections with Amanda," Derek replied carefully. "When my marriage became difficult, I found comfort in her friendship, but I never acted inappropriately until after I discovered Sarah's behavior." It was a masterful reframing that made his affair seem like a consequence of Sarah's alleged crimes rather than the cause of their marriage's breakdown. The hearing concluded with Judge Reynolds announcing she would review all evidence and issue a ruling within 48 hours. Sarah left the courtroom feeling defeated and exposed, the weight of Derek's lies hanging over her like a storm cloud. But Derek and Amanda's campaign of destruction was far from over. That evening, a local television news program ran a feature story about the case, clearly influenced by information provided by Derek's team. The story portrayed Derek as a successful businessman caught in a nightmare scenario with an unstable wife. Amanda was interviewed, presenting herself as Derek's supportive business partner who had witnessed Sarah's concerning behavior firsthand. "Derek is one of the most ethical people I know," Amanda said, looking directly into the camera with perfect composure. "What he's going through with Sarah is heartbreaking. He's trying so hard to protect their unborn child." The news segment included footage of Derek at various charity events and business functions, always looking successful and stable. The few photos of Sarah showed her looking tired and pregnant, reinforcing the narrative of instability. Social media exploded with commentary from people who knew only Derek's version of events. Sarah's former colleagues and acquaintances began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with someone facing such serious allegations. "The court of public opinion has convicted you," Torres said grimly when he called that evening. "Amanda has been very strategic about controlling the narrative." Friday brought Judge Reynolds' ruling, and it was worse than Sarah had feared. While the judge didn't grant Derek's request for immediate custody, she did order a comprehensive psychological evaluation for Sarah and appointed a guardian ad litem to represent the baby's interests. The court finds sufficient concern about the allegations presented to warrant further investigation. Judge Reynolds wrote in her order, "The welfare of the unborn child must be the paramount consideration." The psychological evaluation was scheduled for the following week, and Sarah knew it would be another opportunity for Derek's team to attack her credibility. The evaluator would be influenced by all the negative publicity and false accusations. But Amanda's cruelest move was still to come. She began what Torres called a campaign of public humiliation, designed to break Sarah's spirit completely. It started with carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. Paparazzi began showing up wherever Sarah went, capturing unflattering images of her struggling with everyday tasks while heavily pregnant. These photos were contrasted with glamorous shots of Amanda and Derek at upscale restaurants and cultural events. The message was clear: here was the new, improved version of Derek's life, compared to the burdensome reality of his pregnant wife. Amanda's social media presence became increasingly bold. She posted photos of herself and Derek house hunting, with captions about building something beautiful together. She shared images of expensive nursery furniture with comments about preparing for new additions to our family. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and relentless. Amanda was positioning herself not just as Derek's new partner, but as the future mother figure for Sarah's child. The breaking point came during Sarah's psychological evaluation. Dr. Margaret Webb, the court-appointed psychologist, was supposed to be neutral, but it quickly became clear she had been influenced by the media coverage. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Webb said during their session, "several people have expressed concern about your emotional stability during this pregnancy. Can you help me understand why there seems to be such a pattern of concerning behavior?" Sarah tried to explain that all the allegations were false, but she could see skepticism in Dr. Webb's eyes. The weight of months of stress and false accusations had taken their toll, and Sarah knew she appeared tired and emotionally fragile. "I understand you've been under a great deal of stress," Dr. Webb continued, "but that stress can sometimes lead people to make poor decisions. The financial irregularities, for instance." "I didn't steal any money," Sarah said firmly, but she could hear the desperation in her own voice. After the evaluation, Sarah sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, feeling completely defeated. Every system that was supposed to protect her had been corrupted by Derek's lies and Amanda's manipulation. That evening, her phone rang. It was her sister calling from California. "Sarah, I just wanted to check on you," her sister said carefully. "Mom called and said you're going through a difficult time." "Did she tell you what Derek is claiming?" Sarah asked. "She mentioned some legal problems," her sister replied. "But Sarah, I have to ask, is any of it true? The financial stuff?" I mean, Sarah realized that Derek's campaign had been so effective that even her own family was beginning to doubt her. The isolation was complete and crushing. That night, Sarah stood in the nursery looking at all the preparations she had made for her baby's arrival. The crib, the clothes, the books she had bought to read aloud. Everything represented a future that Derek was trying to steal. She imagined Amanda in that downtown penthouse nursery, holding Sarah's baby and playing the role of mother, while Sarah was painted as the unstable woman who had lost custody of her own child. The thought filled her with a rage so pure and focused that it burned away the despair that had been consuming her. Derek and Amanda had made one crucial mistake in their campaign of destruction. They had underestimated the power of a mother's love and the lengths a woman would go to protect her child. Sarah walked to her computer and began researching everything she could find about Meridian Holdings, LLC, the shell company Derek had used to purchase the penthouse. She started documenting every photo Amanda had posted, every public appearance, every detail of their elaborate deception. If Derek wanted to play a game of public perception and legal maneuvering, Sarah would show him what real investigation looked like. She had been a successful executive because she was smarter and more determined than her competitors. Now she would apply those same skills to destroying the elaborate fiction Derek and Amanda had constructed. The mockery campaign had pushed her to the breaking point, but it had also given her something more valuable than sympathy, absolute clarity about what she was fighting for and why she could never give up. Her baby's life depended on her winning this war, and Sarah Mitchell was done being a victim. She was ready to become the most dangerous enemy Derek had ever faced. The main trial began on a crisp September morning, 3 weeks before Sarah's due date. Walking into the same courtroom where she had endured months of legal humiliation, Sarah felt different. The past weeks of investigation and preparation had transformed her from a victim into a strategist. She moved slowly but deliberately, her 9-month pregnant belly no longer a source of vulnerability, but a visible reminder of what she was fighting to protect. Torres walked beside her, carrying the evidence that would either vindicate her or seal her fate. Derek and Peterson were already seated, accompanied by what appeared to be a small army of assistants and expert witnesses. Derek looked confident, almost relaxed, as if the outcome was already decided in his favor. But it was the gallery that commanded Sarah's attention. Amanda sat in her usual front row seat, but today she wasn't alone. She had brought an entourage, 3 perfectly dressed women who looked like they had stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. They whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing at Sarah with expressions of barely concealed contempt. It was clear that Amanda had orchestrated this display of support, wanting to show the judge and the courtroom observers who had the social advantage. Judge Reynolds entered with her characteristic no-nonsense demeanor, but Sarah noticed something different in her eyes. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of months of motions and accusations, but the judge seemed less patient than before. This trial will determine the dissolution of the Mitchell marriage and the custody arrangements for their unborn child, Judge Reynolds announced. I expect all parties to conduct themselves with appropriate decorum. Peterson's opening statement was a polished performance that built on months of careful narrative construction. He painted Derek as a successful businessman whose world had been shattered by his wife's betrayal and criminal behavior. Your Honor, Peterson said, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority, Mr. Mitchell stands before you as a man who has lost everything: his marriage, his trust, and very nearly his business, all due to his wife's systematic deception. Peterson presented a timeline that made Derek's affair seem like a natural response to Sarah's alleged crimes. Every piece of fabricated evidence was woven into a story that portrayed Derek as the real victim. Mr. Mitchell asked this court not for revenge, but for justice. Peterson concluded, justice for himself, and more importantly, protection for the innocent child who deserves a stable, honest parent. When Torres stood for his opening statement, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. He spoke quietly, forcing everyone to lean forward and listen. Your Honor, Torres began, over the next few days you will see evidence of the most elaborate deception I have encountered in 20 years of legal practice. You will see how a narcissistic individual, aided by his accomplice, has attempted to steal not just money, but a woman's child. Torres outlined their evidence methodically: the hidden penthouse, the shell companies, the forged financial documents. He promised to show that every accusation against Sarah was a projection of Derek's own crimes. Mr. Mitchell hasn't just committed adultery and fraud, Torres said, his voice rising slightly. He has attempted to weaponize this court system against an innocent woman for the sole purpose of avoiding responsibility for his actions. The first day of testimony was Derek's show. He took the stand with practiced confidence, repeating the narrative Peterson had crafted. Under direct examination, he was the picture of a wronged husband reluctantly exposing his wife's crimes. But Torres's cross-examination began to chip away at the facade. He started with simple questions about Derek's business operations, gradually building toward the contradictions in his testimony. Mr. Mitchell, Torres said, you testified that your income has been severely reduced due to market conditions. Is that correct? Yes, unfortunately, Derek replied with apparent sadness. Yet you've continued to maintain expensive lifestyle expenses, haven't you? Peterson objected, but Judge Reynolds allowed the question. Derek shifted uncomfortably before answering. I've had to maintain certain appearances for business purposes, Derek said. Torres presented credit card statements showing thousands of dollars in charges for expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and designer purchases. With each receipt, Derek's claims of financial hardship became less credible, but the real confrontation was still to come. During the lunch recess, Sarah noticed Amanda and her friends clustered together near the courthouse cafe. They were speaking loudly enough for her to overhear, clearly intentionally. "I still can't believe she's putting everyone through this charade," one of Amanda's friends said, glancing pointedly at Sarah. "Everyone can see what's really going on." "Poor Derek," another woman added. "He's been so patient with her delusions." Amanda smiled with satisfaction at her friend's performance. She wanted Sarah to hear every word, wanted her to understand that public opinion had been completely turned against her. When court resumed, the tension in the room was palpable. Judge Reynolds seemed to notice the undercurrents of hostility. Her eyes moving between Amanda's group and Sarah's isolated position. Derek's testimony continued with Peterson guiding him through the alleged evidence of Sarah's financial crimes. Each forged document was presented with theatrical gravity, designed to convince the judge that Sarah was not just unfaithful, but genuinely dangerous. "Your Honor," Derek said, his voice breaking slightly, "I never wanted to believe my wife was capable of such a deception, but the evidence became impossible to ignore." As Derek spoke, Amanda leaned forward in her seat, nodding sympathetically at his words. It was a perfectly choreographed display of support that emphasized Derek's isolation and suffering. But then something unexpected happened. During a brief break in testimony, as the court reporter was changing paper, Amanda whispered something to her friends that was just loud enough for the court to hear. "Look at her," Amanda said, gesturing toward Sarah, "waddling in here trying to get sympathy with that belly. It's pathetic. Derek will have a real family soon, one that isn't built on manipulation." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but this time something was different. She noticed that Judge Reynolds had returned to the bench earlier than expected and was standing perfectly still. Having heard every word, the judge's face remained impassive, but Sarah caught a flicker of something cold and dangerous in her eyes. Amanda, basking in her own cruelty, was completely unaware that she had just made a catastrophic mistake. Judge Reynolds took her seat without comment, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. The mockery had been witnessed by the one person whose opinion mattered most, and Sarah realized that Amanda's arrogance might have finally overplayed their hand. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Reynolds said, her voice carrying a new edge, "please continue with your testimony." Derek resumed speaking about his supposed financial hardship, unaware that his girlfriend had just poisoned their carefully constructed narrative. As he detailed his modest lifestyle and limited resources, Amanda sat behind him radiating the kind of expensive confidence that contradicted every word he was saying. Judge Reynolds listened to Derek's continued testimony with what appeared to be growing skepticism. Her eyes occasionally drifted to Amanda's designer outfit and the expensive jewelry that caught the courtroom lights. When Peterson finished his direct examination, Judge Reynolds announced they would recess until the following morning. As people filed out of the courtroom, Sarah caught the judge's eye for just a moment. What she saw there gave her the first real hope she had felt in months. Judge Reynolds wasn't just listening to the testimony, she was observing everything, including the behavior of the people in her courtroom. Amanda's moment of cruel triumph might have just handed Sarah the weapon she needed to destroy Derek's elaborate deception. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who couldn't resist revealing their true nature when they thought they were winning. The real battle was still ahead, but for the first time, Sarah felt like she might have a chance to save her child and expose the truth about the people who had tried to destroy her life. The second day of the trial began with Torres calling his first witness, Jennifer Walsh, the forensic accountant who had spent months unraveling Derek's financial deceptions. Walsh took the stand with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her evidence was unassailable. Under Torres's methodical questioning, Walsh began to dismantle Derek's claims of poverty with surgical precision. She presented bank records, corporate filings, and transaction histories that told a very different story than the one Derek had offered under oath. "Mrs. Walsh," Torres said, "based on your analysis of Mr. Mitchell's financial records, what is your professional assessment of his actual income during the period in question?" "Mr. Mitchell's income has been consistently substantial," Walsh replied, consulting her notes. In the past 12 months alone, his documented earnings exceed $800,000, not including undisclosed offshore accounts. A murmur went through the courtroom. Derek's claim of near bankruptcy was being systematically destroyed by objective financial evidence. Walsh continued her testimony, presenting evidence of the shell companies Derek had created to hide assets. Each corporate entity was traced back to him through a web of documentation that left no room for doubt. The pattern is clear, Walsh explained to the judge. Mr. Mitchell has been systematically moving marital assets into entities designed to conceal them from divorce proceedings. But Walsh's most devastating revelation was yet to come. Torres approached the witness stand carrying a thick folder of documents. Mrs. Walsh, did your investigation uncover any recent large purchases made by Mr. Mitchell? Yes, Walsh said, her voice steady. 1 month ago, Mr. Mitchell, through a shell company called Meridian Holdings LLC, purchased a penthouse condominium valued at $1.8 million. The courtroom fell silent. Derek's face went pale as Walsh continued her testimony, presenting purchase agreements, loan documents, and property records that proved beyond doubt that Derek had been living a double life. The penthouse was purchased while Mr. Mitchell was claiming financial hardship in this court, Walsh noted. The down payment alone was $360,000. Peterson tried desperately to object, claiming the purchase was a business investment, but the evidence was overwhelming. Walsh had documentation showing that the penthouse was being renovated for residential use, including permits for a nursery. Torres then called his second witness, Michael Chen, a private investigator who had been documenting Derek and Amanda's activities. Chen's testimony included surveillance photos of Derek and Amanda at the penthouse, clearly living together as a couple. On September 15th, Chen testified, I observed Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Cross moving furniture into the penthouse, including what appeared to be nursery furniture. The photos Chen presented showed Derek and Amanda arranging a crib in what was obviously a baby's room. The implications were staggering while claiming poverty and seeking custody of Sarah's unborn child. Derek had been preparing a nursery in his secret love nest. When it came time for Derek to return to the stand for Torres's cross-examination, he looked like a man walking to his execution. The confident demeanor from the previous day had evaporated, replaced by barely concealed panic. Torres began slowly, almost gently, asking Derek to confirm his earlier testimony about his financial situation. Mr. Mitchell, you testified yesterday that your assets total less than $50,000. Do you stand by that statement? Yes, Derek said, his voice weak. And you testified that you've been forced to live modestly due to financial constraints. That's correct. Torres then began presenting the evidence Walsh had provided. With each document, each bank statement, each corporate filing, Derek's story crumbled further. Mr. Mitchell, can you explain how someone with assets of less than $50,000 was able to purchase a $1.8 million penthouse? Derek's attorney objected, but Judge Reynolds overruled him with a sharp look that suggested her patience was exhausted. That was a business investment, Derek stammered. A business investment that includes a fully furnished nursery? Torres asked, presenting the photos Chen had taken. Derek's face flushed red. He looked desperately toward Amanda, as if seeking guidance, but she was staring at him with obvious panic. The nursery was Amanda's idea. For visiting children, it was a pathetic lie, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Torres continued his methodical destruction of Derek's credibility, presenting evidence of offshore accounts, hidden assets, and perjurious testimony. But the moment that would become legend in local legal circles came when Judge Reynolds herself decided to ask a question. The courtroom had fallen into tense silence as Torres concluded his cross-examination. Derek sat slumped in the witness chair, looking defeated and exposed. It seemed the questioning was over. Then Judge Reynolds leaned forward, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her tone deceptively calm, I have just one question for you. Derek straightened slightly, perhaps hoping the judge's question might offer him a chance to redeem himself. Judge Reynolds' eyes were fixed on Derek with laser intensity, but Sarah noticed that the judge's gaze briefly shifted to Amanda in the gallery before returning to the witness. Can you please explain to this court Judge Reynolds said, each word delivered with precise, devastating clarity. The purchase of a $2.3 million penthouse completed last month under Meridian Holdings LLC, where you are listed as CEO and Ms. Cross as CFO, while you claim assets of under $50,000. The question was surgical in its precision. Judge Reynolds hadn't just discovered Derek's lie. She had mapped its entire anatomy with devastating accuracy. The specific amount, the timing, the corporate structure, Amanda's role, every detail proved that the judge had conducted her own investigation. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was the sound of a house of cards collapsing in real time. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The confident mask he had worn for months dissolved completely, revealing the terrified fraud beneath. In the gallery, Amanda's expensive handbag slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Her face went white as she realized that her cruel mockery of Sarah had drawn the judge's attention, leading to an investigation that had uncovered everything. Peterson was frozen in his chair, his carefully prepared defense rendered meaningless by the judge's surgical question. Your Honor, that's... Derek finally managed to speak, but the words came out as incoherent stammering. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Reynolds said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low level. In my 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such a flagrant attempt to defraud a spouse and mislead this court. The judge's words carried the weight of absolute authority and barely contained fury. Perjury is a serious crime, Mr. Mitchell. So is financial fraud. This court does not take either lightly. Derek's attempt at an answer was pathetic. Your Honor, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Judge Reynolds cut him off coldly. And you will have the opportunity to do so to the district attorney's office. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Peterson scrambled to his feet, desperately trying to control the damage. Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to discuss this matter. Judge Reynolds granted it with a curt nod, but her eyes never left Derek's face. As the bailiff approached to escort Derek from the witness stand, he looked broken and hollow. Sarah watched the man who had tried to destroy her life being led away like a common criminal. The elaborate fiction he and Amanda had constructed was crumbling in real time. In the gallery, Amanda sat frozen in horror. The cruel mockery that had given her such satisfaction just 24 hours earlier had led directly to this moment of absolute exposure. The recess lasted 3 hours. When court reconvened, Peterson looked like a man who had aged years in a single afternoon. Derek sat beside him, no longer the confident manipulator, but a broken figure facing the destruction of everything he had built. Your Honor, Peterson began, his voice lacking its usual bravado. My client would like to withdraw his previous testimony and enter into settlement negotiations. Judge Reynolds fixed Peterson with a stare that could have frozen fire. Your client will not simply withdraw perjurious testimony. Mr. Peterson, this matter has now moved beyond civil divorce proceedings. The judge's words carried ominous implications. Derek's lies under oath had transformed what should have been a straightforward divorce into potential criminal matters. However, Judge Reynolds continued, I am willing to hear a complete and truthful accounting of Mr. Mitchell's assets before I make my final determination about referring this matter to the district attorney. What followed was 3 hours of the most thorough financial confession Sarah had ever witnessed. Under Torres's relentless questioning, Derek was forced to reveal every hidden account, every shell company, every asset he had tried to conceal. The true scope of his wealth was staggering. Beyond the penthouse and the offshore accounts, Derek had hidden assets totaling over $4 million. Money that should have been considered marital property had been systematically moved beyond Sarah's reach. Mr. Mitchell, Torres said, presenting a final piece of evidence. Can you explain these recurring monthly payments of $5,000 to Amanda Cross, listed as consulting fees? Derek's voice was barely audible. Those were personal payments. Personal payments for what services? The question hung in the air. Derek couldn't admit they were payments to his mistress without further destroying his credibility, but he also couldn't explain them as legitimate business expenses. I was helping Amanda with her living expenses, Derek finally admitted. It was the final nail in the coffin of his credibility. Not only had Derek been hiding assets, but he had been using marital funds to support his affair while claiming poverty. Amanda, watching from the gallery as her financial arrangement with Derek was exposed in open court, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. The sophisticated woman who had mocked Sarah's pregnancy was revealed as someone who had been essentially paid for her services. Judge Reynolds called for a final recess before rendering her decision. Sarah sat in the hallway with Torres, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. "It's over," Torres said quietly. "Derek's credibility is completely destroyed. The judge is going to award you everything you're entitled to, plus damages for the fraud." When court reconvened for the final time, Judge Reynolds' words were swift and decisive. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "your conduct throughout these proceedings has been reprehensible. You have committed perjury, attempted to defraud your wife, and shown a callous disregard for the welfare of your unborn child." Judge Reynolds awarded Sarah sole ownership of their marital home, half of all Derek's business assets, and substantial monthly support payments calculated on his real income, not his fabricated poverty. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mr. Mitchell will pay all of Mrs. Mitchell's legal fees, which I'm informed total over $100,000. But the judge's final pronouncement was the most satisfying. Given Mr. Mitchell's demonstrated dishonesty in his attempts to manipulate this court, I am awarding Mrs. Mitchell primary custody of the child, with supervised visitation only for Mr. Mitchell." Derek's face crumpled as the full impact of the judge's ruling hit him. He had not only lost his hidden wealth, but had also lost the right to raise his own child unsupervised. "Finally," Judge Reynolds said, her voice carrying unmistakable warning, "I am referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of perjury and financial fraud charges." As the court session ended, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. The nightmare was finally over. Derek and Amanda left the courthouse separately, their grand plans for a future together now overshadowed by potential criminal charges and financial ruin. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the nursery of her new home, holding her healthy baby daughter. She had named her Emily, after her grandmother who had taught her that strength could be quiet but unbreakable. The house was smaller than the one she had shared with Derek, but it was entirely hers. She had used her settlement to start her own marketing consultancy, working with female entrepreneurs who needed someone who understood the challenges of building something from scratch. Derek and Amanda's relationship had not survived the financial and legal consequences of their deception. Amanda had been fired from her job when the fraud investigation revealed her role in the shell companies. Derek was serving 18 months in federal prison for tax evasion and fraud. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her peaceful moment with Emily. It was Maria, her best friend who had first alerted her to Derek's lies. "How are you doing?" Maria asked. "Better than I ever imagined," Sarah replied, looking down at her daughter's sleeping face. "We're building something beautiful here." "Any regrets?" Maria asked gently. Sarah considered the question seriously. The past year had been the most difficult of her life, filled with betrayal, legal battles, and moments when she had thought she might lose everything that mattered. "No regrets," she said finally. "Derek and Amanda taught me something important, that the people who try to break you often reveal their own weaknesses in the process." As Sarah hung up the phone, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Derek's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also freed her from a marriage built on lies. Amanda's cruelty had been painful, but it had ultimately led to her own downfall. The woman who had mocked her pregnancy, who had tried to steal her child and destroy her life, was now facing the consequences of her own arrogance and greed. Sarah had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is not revenge, but persistence. By refusing to be broken, by fighting for the truth even when everyone doubted her, she had not only saved herself but had exposed the corruption of those who had tried to destroy her. Emily stirred in her arms, opening dark eyes that looked exactly like Sarah's. This child would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for her before she was even born, that she had been wanted and protected and loved from the very beginning. 2 years after the trial, Sarah received an invitation that made her smile. It was from Judge Patricia Reynolds, who was retiring after 25 years on the bench and hosting a reception for attorneys who had appeared before her court. Sarah attended the reception, Curious to see the woman who had played such a crucial role in her life outside the formal setting of the courtroom, Judge Reynolds was smaller than Sarah remembered, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had cut through Derek's lies. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Reynolds said when they were introduced in the receiving line. How are you and your daughter doing? We're thriving, Sarah replied. Thank you for seeing through the deception. Judge Reynolds smiled, expression Sarah had never seen in the courtroom. You know, in 25 years, I've seen every kind of manipulation and lie, but that case was special. Why? Sarah asked. Because it reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. Judge Reynolds replied, to protect people who can't protect themselves. Your husband and his accomplice made a fatal error. What was that? They assumed that cruelty would be mistaken for strength, Judge Reynolds said. But real strength is what you showed, continuing to fight for the truth even when the whole world seemed to doubt you. The judge paused, looking thoughtful. I want you to know that Amanda Cross's behavior in my courtroom was one of the most revealing moments I've ever witnessed. Her mockery told me everything I needed to know about the kind of person she really was. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. Emily was now a happy, healthy 2-year-old who filled their small house with laughter and energy. Sarah's business had grown beyond her expectations. Her reputation for helping female entrepreneurs had spread, and she now had clients across 3 states. She had discovered that her experience with Derek's deception had given her an unusual ability to spot dishonesty and manipulation in business dealings. You can smell a lie from a mile away, one client had told her. It's like a superpower. Sarah had learned to see it not as a superpower, but as hard-won wisdom. The experience of being systematically deceived and gaslit had taught her to trust her instincts and value truth above convenience. Derek had been released from prison 6 months earlier. He was required to pay ongoing child support, but Sarah had heard through mutual acquaintances that he was struggling financially. His real estate empire had collapsed during his incarceration, and he was working as a sales associate for someone else's company. Amanda had left Austin entirely, reportedly moving to another state where her role in the fraud scandal was unknown. Sarah felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only gratitude that they were no longer part of her life. The most important lesson Sarah had learned was about the nature of true security. During her marriage to Derek, she had believed that financial wealth and social status provided safety. The house, the cars, the image of success had all seemed like protection against life's uncertainties. But Derek's betrayal had taught her that real security came from within, from knowing her own worth, trusting her own judgment, and building relationships based on honesty rather than convenience. Emily's father was required to have supervised visits twice a month, but he rarely exercised that right. Sarah had made peace with raising her daughter as a single mother. It was challenging, but it was also liberating to make decisions based solely on what was best for Emily, rather than managing a husband's ego and deceptions. Mama, Emily said one evening as Sarah was reading her a bedtime story, why don't I have a daddy like other kids? It was a question Sarah had been preparing for. She took a deep breath and chose her words carefully. You do have a daddy, Sarah said, but sometimes grown-ups make choices that mean they can't all live together. The most important thing is that you are loved completely by the people who are with you. Emily seemed satisfied with this explanation, snuggling closer as Sarah continued reading. These moments of pure contentment were worth more than all the luxury Derek's money had ever provided. As Sarah turned off Emily's bedroom light, she made her way to her own room and opened her laptop. She was working on a book about her experience, not for revenge or publicity, but because other women had contacted her asking for advice about surviving similar situations. How did you know to keep fighting? One woman had written. How did you find the strength when everyone doubted you? Sarah's answer was always the same. She had fought not because she was particularly strong or brave, but because the alternative, losing her child, was unthinkable. The woman who had once been mocked for waddling for sympathy had become an advocate for mothers facing similar battles. Her story had been shared in divorce support groups and women's legal aid organizations, but the most meaningful response had come from an unexpected source. Judge Reynolds had written a letter of recommendation when Sarah applied to speak at a legal conference about financial fraud in divorce proceedings. Mrs. Mitchell's case demonstrated that the truth, however buried under layers of deception, has a way of revealing itself when confronted with persistence and courage, the judge had written. Her experience serves as a reminder that our legal system works best when citizens refuse to be intimidated by those who would abuse it. As Sarah closed her laptop and prepared for bed, she felt the deep satisfaction that comes from having survived something that could have destroyed her. She had not just survived Derek's betrayal and Amanda's cruelty. She had used those experiences to build something better. Emily was growing up in a home where honesty was valued above wealth, where strength was measured by character rather than dominance. She would learn, through her mother's example, that setbacks could become comebacks and that the people who try to diminish you often reveal their own weaknesses in the process. The mistress who had mocked a pregnant wife in court had indeed gotten her answer, just not the one she had expected. Instead of witnessing Sarah's defeat, Amanda had orchestrated her own downfall through the very cruelty she thought made her powerful. And the pregnant wife who had been mocked. She had become something Amanda could never understand, a mother whose love for her child had proven more powerful than any lie, any manipulation, any attempt at destruction. In the end, the judge's one devastating question had not just ended Derek's deception, it had begun Sarah's transformation into the woman she was always meant to be. Strong, independent, and unafraid of the truth, no matter how painful it might be to confront. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she could hear Emily's peaceful breathing from the next room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. But tonight, they were safe, they were free, and they were exactly where they belonged. The story that had begun with mockery and betrayal had become something else entirely, a testament to the power of truth, the strength of mothers, and the justice that sometimes emerges when arrogance finally meets its match. This story reminds us of a universal truth that resonates in courtrooms and communities across America every day. When we think we hold all the power, when we believe our cruelty makes us strong, we often plant the seeds of our own destruction. Derek and Amanda's downfall came not from some external force of justice, but from their own arrogance and miscalculation. They believed that lies could become truth through repetition, that wealth could buy credibility, and that a pregnant woman's vulnerability made her powerless. They were wrong on every count. In courtrooms across the country, judges witnessed this same pattern, the powerful underestimating the powerless, the cruel mistaking fear for respect, the corrupt believing their own lies. And time after time, truth has a way of revealing itself to those patient enough to wait and brave enough to persist. Sarah Mitchell's story is ultimately about more than one woman's fight for justice. It's about the choices we all make when facing our darkest moments. Do we surrender to despair, or do we find the strength to keep fighting for what's right? For every woman reading this who has been told she's crazy for questioning obvious lies, for every mother who has been threatened with losing her children by someone trying to escape consequences for their own actions, for every person who has been mocked for their vulnerability, remember that the truth doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against deception is simply refusing to accept it, no matter how many people tell you you're wrong, no matter how hopeless the situation seems. And sometimes, when you least expect it, justice arrives in the form of a simple question that cuts through all the lies and exposes the truth that was always there, waiting to be discovered. The mistress mocked the pregnant wife in court, but the judge's one question ended it all, proving that arrogance, in the end, is often its own worst enemy. Sarah's story proves that truth has a way of revealing itself when we least expect it. Sometimes the people who think they're untouchable end up destroying themselves through their own arrogance. If this story of justice and redemption resonated with you, show some love by hitting that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that persistence and truth can triumph over deception and cruelty. And if you want more real-life stories of justice prevailing against all odds, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss when karma comes full circle. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's arrogance led to their own downfall? I read every single comment. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful weapon against lies is simply refusing to accept them.